Sam had dedicated his entire life to his only son, Ryan. After Sam's wife's demise, Ryan became the center of Sam's life. Ryan was only 3 when his mother expired. Sam's family members forced him to get married to have a stepmom for Ryan's brought up. But Sam straight away turned down the idea. He couldn't trust a stranger with his young son. Hence, he never married and took the role of both mother and father for his beloved son. Sam would do everything for his son. He would bathe, drop him to school, and even cook for him while managing his large company. People were in awe of how Sam was able to manage his fatherly duties and run his company. Sam was protective of his only son because of his naivete and innocence. Many tried befriending and using him because of his rich background and popularity. Sam had trained Ryan to be vigilant and never blindly trust people because people can disguise themselves and be deceptive. When Ryan reached 25, he was actively managing his father's company. He turned out to be an excellent son and always obeyed his father. People always complimented Ryan for being an obedient and respectable son. And just like Sam, Ryan also loved his father. He knew how much his father had sacrificed for him and spent all of his life caring for him. Ryan had promised to always be there for his father, especially after his father's severe car accident, resulting in spine damage. Sam was on his way home when a huge truck hit his car and fled the scene. The passerby found Sam unconscious and admitted him into a nearby hospital. When the news reached Ryan, he was immediately rushed to the hospital. He was afraid that he might have lost his father. However, when he learned that Sam was alive, he was relieved. The doctors told Ryan that Sam had severely damaged his backbone. Hence, he would not be able to move. It came quite as a shock to Ryan that he won't see his father actively moving and doing things on his own. But the doctors had given him hope that if Sam's condition improved, he would be able to sit and stand. From that day onwards, Ryan cared for his father like an infant. He would change him, bathe him, talk to him for hours, and brief him about the matters of the company. Sam was happy that he had a son to look after him. He loved spending time with his son and his nurse Martin, who was also a good friend of Ryan's. Martin took care of Sam when Ryan went to work in the morning. One day, a new employee joined the company in the accounts department. She was pretty good at understanding finance and money flow. Ryan had called her in her office to discuss the company's quarterly financial statements. When Camilla entered the office, Ryan was taken aback pleasantly. He assumed Camilla would be around 35 and more mature. However, Camilla was 27 and looked quite younger because of her physique and dress. Ryan had discussed the financial matters and was pleased that Camilla was a smart and confident woman. She was also passionate about her career and wanted to achieve more. Ryan was smitten by her personality and asked her out on a date without informing his father. After meeting a few times, Ryan decided to marry her because Camilla cared for him. One day, Ryan told Sam about Camilla. "Dad, we love each other a lot. I want to marry her, and I'm sure you will love her." Sam was happy that his son was starting a new chapter in his life. "You have my blessings, son, but I would like to meet that lucky lady first." The next day, Ryan brought Camilla to meet Sam. She was indeed charming, and Sam gave permission to Ryan to get married to her. Ryan was happy that his father had approved of his choice, and he married Camilla in a grand ceremony. Things were going perfectly well for Ryan. His father's company was expanding, he had married the love of his life, and his father was also recovering quickly. However, after a few days, things started getting weird for him. One day when he reached home, he was surprised to see that Camilla had fired all the household staff and replaced them with new ones. When Ryan asked her why, she said, "The old staff was not taking care of Sam in this house. That's why I hired a new team to do their best." Ryan was relieved, but he started noticing that his father slept throughout the day. He asked Martin what his father was. "Martin, is Dad all right? He's sleeping more than usual." Martin scratched his head and said, "Yeah, I have noticed that too. After eating his lunch, he dozes off and does not wake up until dinner." Ryan decided to discuss the issue with his wife. "Dad has been sleeping more than usual. I think we should discuss the matter with the doctor." Camilla shook her head and said, "I know what's the matter. Your friend Martin put something inside Sam's lunch. I think he gives sleeping pills to your dad. I saw him secretly hiding a bottle inside the drawer." Ryan was astounded. He marched straight to Sam's room. He rummaged through his drawers and he found a bottle of sleeping pills. He was angry at Martin for doing this to his father. "I don't understand why Martin would do this. He's my best friend and love my dad." Ryan asked Camilla. "I have noticed him leaving the house more than often. Probably that's why he had sleeping pills, to make your dad fall asleep so that he can fool around," Camilla replied to her husband. She took her husband's hand and said, "I think you should fire Martin. What if someday overdoses Sam?" Ryan thought Camilla was right. He couldn't risk his father's life. "I know an excellent nurse who will care for your father. Camilla suggested to her husband. Ryan agreed and fired Martin. The next day, Bob arrived, and Camilla and Ryan took him to meet Sam. "Hey, Dad, he's Bob. He's going to look after you," Ryan said to Sam. "Where's Martin? I want him to be my nurse." Sam was not happy to see Bob. He looked less like a nurse and more like a gym trainer. "Dad, I have fired Martin for adding sleeping pills into your food. Bob is excellent. He will take good care of you," Ryan explained to his father. "What? Martin is a nice boy. He would never do that." He paused briefly and looked at Camilla and whispered in Ryan's ear, "I need to speak to you alone, please." Ryan nodded his head. "Camilla, can you please show Bob around and hand over Dad's medication schedule, please?" Ryan requested Camilla to have some privacy with his dad. Soon the room was empty. Ryan shut the door and spoke to Sam. "Yes, Dad? What is it?" Sam sighed and said, "What I am about to say might hurt you, but your wife is a cheater. I have overheard her speaking and flirting with a man named Bob, and now she has hatched an evil plan for Martin and brought her lover home." Ryan was shocked to hear his father. "No, Father, you must be mistaken. Camilla only loves me. Bob is a nurse, and she hired him for you." Ryan tried comforting his father and left. Camilla had overheard the conversation between Ryan and Sam. She was afraid that her plan might fail, and she had to do something quickly to gather all the family's wealth and elope with her boyfriend, Bob. She went to her room and waited for Ryan to come. Once he came inside the bedroom, Camilla observed Ryan was upset. "Hey, honey, what's the matter?" she asked Ryan. A few minutes later, Ryan told her everything about what Sam had said to him. It was the perfect opportunity for Camilla to get what she wanted. I guess your father hallucinates because of the excessive sleeping pills that Martin had been giving him, and I am afraid that he might lose his sanity soon." Ryan believed his wife. She also said, "Ryan, I think you should talk to your father to transfer all his wealth and business into your name. So if something happens to him, nobody else tries defrauding you." Ryan seriously considered his wife's suggestion and decided to talk to his father tomorrow. The next day, Ryan talked to his father hesitantly about the company and properties. Sam was smart, and he knew that Camilla was feeding him words. Hence, he refused his son. "No, according to my will, you won't get a single property or any share in my business while I am alive. You will get everything after my demise." Ryan nodded, noticing that his father was speaking louder than usual. Ryan tenderly kissed his father's forehead and left. Once again, Camilla had overheard their conversation and was furious to learn that her plan didn't work. "As soon as Ryan gets everything, I'll file for divorce and domestic abuse case and demand 60% of all his wealth. And then we will start a new life in the USA and raise our kid together." Bob hugged her and said, "I really hope this old man agrees, or our plan will fail." Sam had hidden Camilla's pregnancy from his son. He didn't want him to learn that his wife was pregnant with his lover's child and was using him for his money. Sam had decided to expose Camilla's real intention to Ryan, and that's why he refused to give a dime to Ryan. He had also paid one house help to keep an eye on Camilla, Bob, and their activities and secretly record it with a camera. Sam wanted enough evidence to confront his daughter-in-law. The next morning, Camilla spilt a cup of boiling water in her hand. She went to Sam's room and dropped a bowl of piping hot soup near his bed. Next, she called Ryan and lied to him. "Ryan, your dad has gone insane. He threw a bowl of hot soup in my hand. My hand is burnt. Please take me to the hospital." Ryan was puzzled to hear her wife crying. He rushed home and ran straight to his room. Camilla was crying profusely. He went to his father's room and saw the broken bowl of soup on the floor. He then looked at his father. "Son, Camilla dropped it on the floor. Trust me, I didn't do anything. Please trust me." Ryan had tears in his eyes as he left his father's room. Camilla grabbed Ryan's hand when she was in the hospital. "Ryan, I have amazing news for you. You're going to be a father. I'm so glad the soup fell on my hand and not my belly." Ryan was pleased to hear this news. He hugged his wife. Camilla knew that it was the right opportunity to demand Ryan move his father into a mental asylum. "Ryan, we have to do something about Sam. He's getting violent, and now I can't risk having him around. You have to move him into an old age house or an asylum." Ryan was stunned to hear this. He instantly shook his head and said, "I'm sorry. I can't do it. He's my father. I'll talk to him." Camilla shook her head. "No, Ryan, I can't live with him. I'm afraid that he will harm our baby and me. Please listen to me or divorce me." Ryan felt trapped. He couldn't let go of his wife and child. Hence, he decided to move his father to an old age home. He called a few people, and his father was safely transferred into one of the best old age homes in the city. A few weeks later, Ryan received a call from his father. "Son, can you come and visit me? Also, bring Martha with you. Tell her to bring my important things." Ryan hadn't visited his father even once. He was ashamed of leaving his father and breaking his promise to take care of him. Moreover, he terribly missed his father and decided to meet him today. But he couldn't wrap his mind around why his father had asked for Martha. Upon arriving at the old age home, Sam smiled at his son. Ryan noticed that his father had lost a lot of weight and looked weak. "Are you all right, Dad? Do they take good care of you?" he asked Sam. "Yes, son. They are lovely people. I called you here today to tell you something," Sam replied. He looked at Martha, who obediently took out a camera and handed it to Ryan. "Son, this camera has recorded your wife's real face and what she's been doing in your absence," Sam told Ryan. Ryan started watching different clips and was devastated to learn that his wife cheated on him and only married him for his wealth. He started crying and said sorry to his father for transferring him to old age. "Dad, what a fool I have been. I chose that cheater over you. Please forgive me. If you hadn't told Martha to record everything, she would have continued fooling me. Thank you for saving me like always." Ryan kissed his father's hand. Sam patted his son's head and replied, "I love you, Ryan. I am glad you have finally learned the truth about your wife. Now, pack up my bags and let's go home and kick out that cheater from our lives." Ryan smiled and looked forward to a fresh start with his father back in his life.
Elizabeth took the usual route back from her work to her house. The London streets were cold enough already. While her torn socks were doing no help in keeping her warm, she was wrapped in old shawls filled with patches as white fog blew out her mouth. Taking a basket of bread home, she was sure her younger siblings would be more than happy to see her with food. Rarely did they get freshly made bread at this hour. It was a delight to have food for the family. Summers brought weakness with the heat and lack of food, while winters were expensive because the town's poor people had to arrange warmth alongside food. She knocked on the door of the little house across the corner, and the wooden door opened in no time. "Lizzie's home!" the young blonde girl called out to the entire house, which had only one room and a lounge to spend their days in. Everybody gathered in the lounge quickly to welcome her. She was the family's bread earner. 2 twin boys 8 years old came running out of their bedroom, where the mother had tucked them in. "Bread, Lizzie? Where did you get that from?" the mother greeted the boys. "Bakery round the corner, ma'am. Gave me a few pennies extra today," she replied with a smile as the kids around her made their way to the dining table. "How delightful! May she gain health again," Lizzie's mother prayed joyously for her madam. She took the bread basket out of her hand and placed it on the dining table. Elizabeth hung her coats and scarves on the holder and went to the restroom to freshen up. They saved up little loaves for her, dividing the bread among the other 4 children. Elizabeth worked as a caretaker for the old lady around the block. She was ancient and could not even eat or move on her own. There were no children, heirs, or caretakers of Mrs. Walker. Her wealth was known to many people, as she was always careful about trusting no one. Yet she trusted Elizabeth, knowing that she had no interest in Mrs. Walker's wealth and only cared for the bit she could earn for her family with loyalty. She had also made her trust by being more than a servant. Elizabeth was the listener, genuinely caring and devoted daughter-like figure that Mrs. Walker could have wished for. She would often tell her to stay the night at her house as she missed him upon her departure. But Lizzie had a family home to return to. Mrs. Walker knew how much she loved them. One day, Lizzie woke up as usual early in the morning, getting ready to go to Mrs. Walker's house. She locked her house door and was warm within the shawls of her entire family. She started making her way to her work. There were plenty of things she used to do before the old lady woke up. She cleaned the whole house. The sweeping of floors often made Lizzie forget about the problems of her own life. She played the gramophone that held the most beautiful, calming music from the best musicians to her employer's playlist. Mrs. Walker could not hear far away, so she was never bothered with the symphonies playing as she overslept through the day. Lizzie was used to making breakfast precisely at the time when she knew Mrs. Walker would wake up, and she placed the freshly made bacon and eggs on the dining table. Placing tea and French toast on the tray, she took the breakfast to Mrs. Walker's bedroom. Usually, Mrs. Walker would be sitting upright by now. Having woken up, freshened up, she would be waiting for breakfast. But today, Elizabeth's knock did not welcome a beautiful smile in response. It held silence. Lizzie frowned but knocked again. The sheer silence bothered her, moving her to open the door at once. She did the same and found Mrs. Walker peacefully sleeping in her bed. Lizzie placed the breakfast on the table nearby. "Mrs. Walker," she called out, "it's mid-morning. Quite past your sleep time," she hesitantly said. Mrs. Walker did not respond, but continued her peaceful slumber. "Would you like me to bring in the breakfast later?" she asked, receiving no response. "Mrs. Walker?" she called out again, walking closer to her. This time, she sat on the bed and kept a hand on the lady's resting hand. The icy hand startled Elizabeth. Her eyes widened in horror. She placed a hand on her neck and another on her wrist. No movement at all. "Mrs. Walker," she whimpered, kissing her employer's hand and resting her hand on it. Not just an employer, but a close friend. Someone she dearly cared about had passed away. Lizzie informed the guards and the gardener. Feeling worn out at having found the woman she so profoundly adored in this situation, she left the place in remorse, walking back to her house, feeling worn out. A few days later, Lizzie opened the knocking door. She had not found any new work. Instead, she was so upset she was not even thinking of work for now. But her family could not survive forever on their savings, and she was well aware of it. "Yes?" Lizzie greeted the man in the black suit. He was holding papers in his hand and seemed to have arrived from an office. "Elizabeth McQuoid?" "Yes," she responded with a slight frown. "I have some information for you," the stern man replied from within his heavy mustache. After sitting only 10 minutes with the man in her tiny lounge, she was left speechless. He had given her information that she did not know how to process. She only knew that her days had gotten rough after the demise of Mrs. Walker, but she did not know her departure was to bring her such news. "You're telling me she inherited all her wealth?" Elizabeth questioned with wide eyes. "Yes, all her wealth to you," Mrs. Walker's lawyer informed Elizabeth of her query. "She wrote in her will that all her wealth should be given to you after her death," he confirmed with simpler words to help her understand. "But why? I was just her caretaker," she asked, not knowing how to respond. "Well, because she has no heirs, and she wrote that you would take the best care of her house and wealth," he explained. "I'm sorry. How much did she asked hesitantly, still recovering from the shock. That's about 3 properties here in London and 2 in Liverpool," he generally answered. "You will receive all calculations in a paper. But first, I need you to visit the court for your inheritance matters. That's all I came for." "Thank you for the tea, Miss McQuoid," he politely said, leaving for the door. She stood up in honor of the guest, watching him go out. Sitting back down in shock, she was unaware that her mother had heard the whole conversation. She hugged Lizzie with tears in her eyes. Finally, the days of her poverty were over for good. The next day, she visited the court with him for the given hours. The lawyer waited in line before he got called out by a few people staring at Elizabeth. She soon could feel the environment and the lawyer's facial expressions change. She knew something was wrong. They appeared before the judge as he called on them and showed him the documents. Upon questioning by the judge, the people staring at Elizabeth earlier got up. "My clients are the true heirs of Mrs. Walker. Here are the documents proving the same," another man looking like the lawyer presenting them said, giving the judge's clerk the documents. As quickly as the dreams were made, Elizabeth could see them falling apart. She looked at the people, uncertain whether she even had the right to the wealth she claimed. They got out of the courtroom, and Mrs. Walker's lawyer looked at young Lizzie, perplexed at the situation. "I do not believe them, nor does the judge. Their papers seem to be fraudulent," the lawyer sternly replied. She could not understand a word. The days for her were as unreal as they could get. "What now?" she questioned him for guidance. The middle-aged man looked furious at the situation that had risen in front of him. "We'll fight the claim," he replied with determination. The thought of Lizzie's family flashed back. She had to take care of them. She could not get herself caught up in the mess of court issues. "I can't," I'm too weak for this, she whispered, looking down. There was no one in eternity she could build confidence to visit the courtrooms regularly, fight issues, and people who came questioning her. You are the only person she wanted to have the wealth. I can't be disloyal to my client, not even when she's no longer with us. He looked at her. The lawyer's loyalty gave rise to fire in Elizabeth. She questioned herself about becoming disloyal to her employer now that she was dead. Elizabeth, you are my only family. Lizzie recalled the words once spoken by Mrs. Walker herself. The days and nights passed for Elizabeth in the quest of gaining the verdict from the court. Mr. Oliver, the lawyer, left no stone unturned to help her fight the claim. The young Lizzie grew a century in wisdom and faith. There was no lack of confidence and hesitation she could find in herself now after months of going back and forth to the courtroom for the wealth she believed she righteously owned. She would often pass in front of the house of Mrs. Walker, missing the residence as if it was her place of living. Soon enough, she found a job in a boutique around the block. It brought her no joy, but gave her much relief as she could earn far better and support her family. What do you think will happen today? Mr. Oliver questioned, piling his papers in the courtroom. It was the last day of their hearing, and the verdict was supposed to be announced today. Whatever happens, I'm sure Mrs. Walker would be happy we put up a fight, she smiled, looking at him. That's the spirit. He patted her head. She had lost a dear lady but found a friend in Mr. Oliver who truly supported her and whose loyalty she could vouch on. She knew no matter what happened, he had her back. They stood up as the judge entered his place of seating, impatiently. She waited for them to present their arguments and held her breath for the verdict. The will of Mrs. Walker clearly states the inheritance transfer. Hence, I announce Ms. Elizabeth McCoy as the legally entitled person to Mrs. Walker's wealth, the judge announced. The words were like music from Mrs. Walker's gramophone. They brought peace to a turmoil she had been fighting for a long time. Everyone stood up. Mr. Oliver shook her hand, congratulating her on the win before she hugged him at their success. She was happy to go home with the victory of truth and the spirit of not feeling insecure. The turmoil had turned her wise. She was no longer the young Elizabeth, scared and only wanted the best for her family alone. She had more significant motives to live for. She was aware that her wealth, as Mrs. Walker would have desired, should be used only for the well. She walked out of the courtroom, richer by pocket and richer by heart. It was a cold winter night when Ellis and her parents were driving home from her school play. She loved wintertime, especially at Christmas time. The smell of cinnamon, the sight of 1,000 lights everywhere she looked, and the sound of Christmas carols. Her favorite thing, however, was decorating the house with her parents. Ellis was very excited because it was Christmas Eve the following day, and she could not wait to decorate the tree with her father and prepare dinner with her mother. As they drove home, Christmas songs were playing on the radio, and her parents sang along. Her mom turned around and gave Ellis a big smile, telling her to sing with them. The three, singing and having a good time, were cheerful in the car. Suddenly, the car started sliding on the road, and Dad tried to hold the wheel under control. He did not see the ice on the street because it was covered with fresh snow. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. He lost control of the wheel, and everything happened fast. Ellis was in shock, unable to move or scream. She just sat there, watching the car smash into a pole. Then, it all went dark. Snow was still falling gently on the ground when she opened her eyes. She felt something warm on her forehead, and as she touched it, she felt blood. Still in shock, Ellis got out of the car. There was broken glass everywhere, snow red from blood. The streetlight above her head blinked. Then she remembered. Mom, Dad. She crawled to the front of the car and tried to open the passenger door. However, she could not. The car was heavily damaged, and the more she tried to get her parents, the weaker she felt. And that was the last thing she remembered before waking up at the hospital. I am very sorry for your loss. These are the words she heard when she asked about her parents. How? Both of them? Alice was in tears, hoping this was all just a bad dream. But it wasn't. On that cold winter night, she lost both of her parents. Unsure of what will happen next, Alice felt alone and scared. An unfamiliar face appeared in her room as she lay in her bed. "Hi, Alice. I know you do not remember me, since you were just a baby when I last saw you. My name is Maggie, and I am your mother's sister. I know you would prefer to live with your grandparents, but it was your parents' last will that you come to live with me." Unsure what to feel about that or what to say, Alice started crying again as she slowly realized she would never see her parents again. At that point, she did not care about anything. She did not watch where or with who she would live with, so she just nodded to her aunt and went back to sleep. The following day, she was discharged from the hospital, since she only had a few stitches on her forehead and a couple of bruises on her arms. "I packed most of your stuff and brought it to my house. I thought you would prefer it that way," Maggie said to Alice. "But we can stop at your house if you like." Alice remembered her father bringing all the Christmas decorations down from the attic and putting them in the middle of their living room. She remembered her mom laughing as she almost tripped over the boxes. She remembered how excited she was that day, knowing that Christmas was just around the corner. So no, she did not want to go to their house at the moment because there were just too many memories there. After about an hour of driving, Maggie stopped in front of a big yellow house. "Here we are," she said as she opened Alice's door. It was a lovely house with big windows and a huge backyard. "I hope you will like it here," her aunt said as they walked toward the front gate. The inside of the house was quite lovely, but so different than her house. Everything was so clean and tidy, sterile almost. "I have to go to work now," said Maggie. "I have a 12-hour shift, so I won't be back before midnight. If you want to order in, there is food in the fridge and some money on the table." Alice was surprised to hear that it was Christmas Eve after all. However, she remembered her aunt told her she was a nurse at the local hospital, so it made sense she had to work crazy hours. "But it is Christmas Eve, and I don't want to be alone," Alice said. "This was always a special day for my family. We cooked dinner and decorated the house together." Her aunt looked at her and told her that she does not celebrate Christmas, so it is just an ordinary day for her. She had no Christmas decorations and no Christmas tree. After Maggie left, Alice went to her room and started crying. She could not believe what was happening and was heartbroken that she would spend her favorite holiday alone. She was only 12 years old, and her entire world collapsed. This was supposed to be a happy day, filled with joy and laughter, Christmas songs and celebration. Instead, she was all alone in this big, empty house. Her eyes suddenly felt heavy, and she slowly fell asleep. When she woke up, it was already dark outside, and her growling stomach reminded her it was time to eat something. But she was eager to explore the rest of the house, so Alice decided to walk around the house instead of getting something to eat. Her room was on the first floor, so she decided to see what else was on that floor. Next to her room was a bathroom with a big bathtub. There were 3 more bedrooms down the hall, and Alice kept wondering why one person would need such a big house with so many empty bedrooms. There was 1 more door at the end of the hall, and she was sure this was just another bedroom. Alice opened the door, and she could not believe her eyes when she saw what was behind them. There was a giant Christmas tree in the corner. The tree was all covered in dust, but it looked magical. A dozen boxes were in the other corner, all with Christmas decorations, different colors, shapes, and sizes. Hundreds of little Christmas lights were on the shelf next to her, and another batch in a box across the room. For a moment, she just stood there, completely confused. Alice could not understand why her aunt would lie. Why would she tell her that she does not celebrate Christmas, but has a whole room filled with Christmas decorations? And in a blink of an eye, she decided to still make the best out of this terrible situation. Box by box, she carried it all down the stairs and into the living room. The tree was the biggest challenge, but she was determined to carry it down. It took her a while before everything was moved from that secret room. However, Alice was excited to start decorating finally. She put up the tree and started thinking about which decorations she would choose. She decided to go with red and blue since these were her parents' favorite colors. After she was almost done decorating the tree, Alice saw something shiny at the bottom of the box. She looked inside and could not believe her eyes when she saw two small angels. That is when she knew it was a sign. She was going to be okay. Her parents will always watch over her, and she will honor their memory every Christmas Eve by following their tradition. It was almost midnight when she finished decorating. Suddenly, the house did not feel that big and cold anymore. Lights were blinking in every room. The tree looked magnificent, and she even decorated the fireplace with Christmas socks for her and her aunt. Exhausted but content, Ella sat down and just tried to enjoy some Christmas spirit. But little did she know what would happen when Maggie came home. Shock, anger, disbelief. Maggie was furious when she opened the front door of her house. Trying to hold back her emotions, she looked at Alice and asked her why she would do something like that. "I told you I don't celebrate Christmas, and I don't decorate my house. Everything in that room was there for a reason. I never permitted you to go lurking around the house to invade my privacy like that. I took you in because my sister wanted me to, but maybe this was a mistake. Maybe it would be better for you to live somewhere else," Maggie said with tears in her eyes. Alice was heartbroken. She felt like she keeps losing everything and everyone. She was trying to make this Christmas Eve bearable. Drowning in her grief, Alice collapsed in the middle of the living room. When she came to, Maggie was sitting right beside her. Her face was covered in tears, and Alice told her she was sorry for doing what she did. Her only wish was to feel close to her parents, and following their tradition was a way to do just that. Maggie's voice was trembling when she started telling her story. "It was 10 years ago, Christmas Eve. My husband and I just bought this house. We wanted a big family, 5 or 6 children, so it made sense to buy a big house. I was 8 months pregnant, and we were expecting a little boy. We could not be happier, and we were excited to spend that Christmas Eve together, since we knew that there would already be 3 of us next year. We decided to do some last-minute shopping because you and your parents were arriving the next day. I have loved you since you were born, and I am proud to be your aunt. I still don't remember much from that evening. I remember a bright light coming at us very fast, and then everything went dark. I woke up at the hospital, only to find out my baby boy and my husband didn't make it. I was devastated and lost in my grief for a very long time. I pulled away from everybody, including you and your parents. As time passed, I started to get used to my loneliness, and it became my way of life. Since the accident, I have never celebrated Christmas again. It was too painful. So when I came home tonight and saw what you did, all that grief came crashing again. But I understand now. We are together in this grief. We both lost those closest to us. And maybe this is the reason your mother wanted you to stay with me in case something happens to her, because she knew we would be united in our grief. So I am very sorry for my reaction, and I am very sorry for leaving you alone tonight." Alice was in tears listening to her aunt's story. She realized Maggie was right. Even in her last wish, her mom knew exactly what to do. Grateful to her aunt for sharing the story, Alice leaned over and gave Maggie a big hug. "Thank you for reminding me that Christmas is all about hope, new hope. As we begin our journey together, let us promise each other that we will continue your family's tradition and celebrate every Christmas Eve together, with the tree, decorations, Christmas songs, and dinner," Maggie said softly. United in their grief, Alice and Maggie spent the night sitting in front of the fireplace, slowly sipping their hot cocoa and sharing stories about their loved ones. It was a magical evening, uniting two broken souls in their sorrow. As Maggie looked at her niece, she felt something she had not thought about for a long time: hope.